Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
Hey, it's Hump Day. Welcome to Podcast Stardust, the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
What day is it? I'm sorry, had to do it. And I'm Jay Krebs.
All right. With the season over, we are looking back at the first season, we hope, of Skeleton Crew. But before we dive into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Sure thing, Dennis. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital line, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, the barrier is down, and now we are broadcasting to the galaxy. Everyone knows where Hatton is. So, as I was just saying, we've had a little time to sit on the season finale of Skeleton Crew. It was actually featured again a couple times over the past few days on the Hidden Heroes channel on Disney Plus, at least like some combination of 3 or 4 episodes. So I've had it playing in the background a few times. Have you had a chance to go back and rewatch any of it at all, Jay?
No, I haven't, and I definitely want to. Side note, I started rewatching Andor though, so
Oh,
that's
good,
good.
good. Yeah, I've got that
Yeah,
queued up. I'm going to be doing that. But
but this is
yeah, I've
definitely
just
one I'll be revisiting for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I never sat down with the intention of just like watching Skeleton Crew again, but I've really become a fan of, if I don't have something in mind, just turning on Disney Plus and then going down to those always on channels and seeing what's on the Hidden Heroes, because it's usually some kind of Star Wars and Marvel. Occasionally they'll throw in some Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that, but or Doctor Who has been on there, but I'm not a Doctor Who fan. I don't come at me here. Don't take away my geek card. But they did a mini marathon of the first 4 episodes of The Mandalorian the other day, and then they'll do these blocks of episodes from Skeleton Crew. So, like I said, I've had an opportunity just to kind of have it on, and I've sat down and watched it, or had it on in the background at least while I've been doing other things, and I'll put my head up for certain scenes like that. But again, I've been enjoying rewatching it now that it's all over and just kind of seeing how things go. But anyway, that was a massive aside and long way of saying we're just kind of going to look back at the season now that it's over and kind of give some of our thoughts and get into a little bit more of the details on this. But with that saying, we gave very positive reviews to every single one of these episodes as they happened. Have your opinion changed any since the season ended?
I think it's only gotten more favorable, quite honestly, because, now that we've got it in the rearview mirror, it allows for some hindsight on a lot of things, and it allows for, some themes and ideas to marinate a little bit more. And I just realized how rich this series is with so many things, and just how amazing it is. And just I appreciate the series so much more, even in hindsight, than I think I did at the time, if that's even possible. So
Mhm.
again, that's one of the reasons why I'm super excited to get to go back to it.
Yeah, it's I'm with you. My opinion of the show hasn't declined any since it ended. And with this period of reflection, I've been sitting back and thinking, I was like, this is interesting. For a Star Wars show, there's not a single lightsaber duel in it. I mean,
Hmm.
Jod uses a lightsaber, but it's all one-sided. It's not like he has any fights with a lightsaber. He mainly uses it to threaten people. Uh, Second, there aren't really any blaster fire exchanges. The pirates are shooting at people, but there's not usually anyone shooting back. Or except for the very beginning of the show when the pirates take over that freighter that kicks everything off. There's not a lot in the way of space combat other than some pursuit. And again, at the very end of the final episode, that's not to say there isn't action, but it is much more of the kids racing towards something or racing away from something type of action there, evading
Yeah.
people. And so I'm not saying that's not Star Wars, but think of the Acolyte and how many lightsaber duels we have there. Think of the Mandalorian and how often he gets into combat. Book of Boba Fett, same thing. Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's him fighting Darth Vader or fighting off various ruffians and the like. There's a lot more of the hand-to-hand or space combat or that type of stuff that's a hallmark of Star Wars that wasn't necessarily the big hallmark of Skeleton Crew. And I don't want to overstate this. This is not, I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill here, but it did strike me that, it has Star Wars elements to it, but it's not steeped in some of those key type of scenes.
Right. Yeah, and it didn't have to be. And that's the
Exactly.
beauty of this. It really, it was able to just stand on its own through its own storytelling and its own, merit.
Yeah. So I guess, it's just kind of surprising to me there that's the way it worked out. And it really does come off, as we've been saying all along, as an 80s Amblin type of a movie. Then
Mhm.
this homages to E.T. and the Goonies, and just all those movies from that era. I was thinking of Explorers. Did you ever see that movie as a kid?
No, I didn't.
Okay, it's basically three kids build a spaceship in their backyard based off of some schematics that they come up with in the dreams. It turns out that they were transmitted by aliens.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually, they blast off, they go up in space, they meet the aliens, and they have to get back to Earth. So some very similar things that happen there. And then the aliens aren't exactly who they thought they were, not malicious, but just different. So
Mm.
that was a fun show that I watched, or movie, I should say, several times when I was a kid. But again, there was all that type of stuff there. So we've discussed all that. If you had to describe what the theme of this show was after taking in all of season one, themes, what would you say it was?
You mean as far as, how to describe the show to someone else
No, I'm
to
not just
say
talking
this
about General
is
Disco because we can, as I just did. But I mean,
yeah.
like, what are the themes that they're carrying through? What's the message they're trying to get across, if anything?
Oh, okay. I would say, adventure,
Yeah.
personal growth, pirates,
See, I think
um,
pirates is an element, not so much a theme.
friendship. Okay, friendship,
Yeah.
um, truthfulness, loyalty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're hitting on some words. I mean, I guess if I
yeah.
was going to go on to describe it there, I think what I would say is that there's definitely the coming of age story. These are kids that at the
Mhm,
beginning of the movie, either getting ready to take their assessment or do take their assessment, except for Wim. And now he's behind in that regard. And he's got his head in the clouds. He's looking for adventure. But then when they get out there beyond the safety of their world, the adventure is a lot more difficult than they think it is when it
mhm,
comes down to it. As Fern ends up telling her mother, like we went to a bunch of different places, we saw a lot of horrible things, but everywhere we went, we found people that were willing to help us. And so, that I think is a theme as well
mhm,
that gets wrapped
mhm,
up nice and tidy for us at the end of the series. And, it's not like all these kids were friends. Neil and Wim were, and then KB and Fern were, but they had to put aside differences and learn how to work together. That there's kind of a place for all of them in the galaxy there. Wim is the dreamer, the adventurer. His head's the clouds. Fern is the streetwise one who's always looking for an angle when it came down to it. KB is trying to fit in, overcome her disability there. And then, you got Neil, who is a bit of a pleaser when it comes down to it, but he's always able to, come up with that insight, whether he intends it to be the epiphany for characters or not. He repeatedly has ways of getting people to look at things that they just had never seen before. Like I'm thinking of Fern,
mhm.
when they're climbing up the side of the mountain to get back to their ship, and he can't keep up with her. And she's like, "This isn't easy." He's like, "Well, yeah, not for you with those long spider legs."
Yeah.
And so finally gets her to stop and realize, okay, everyone's not capable of doing the things that I'm capable of doing.
Yeah, and it's just hitting me too that the overarching kind of feel to this is, and I've mentioned things like Stranger Things before, but it's almost in some ways the Star Wars version of like a John Hughes movie from the 1980s. You know what I mean? So you've got like things
Yeah.
like The Breakfast Club and, Ferris Bueller's Day Off and all of those different kinds of things where you have these different teenagers that are put together that have to learn from each other and have to basically overcome something, with each other. And it's this group that you never would have thought you would put together that can be successful with one another.
Only the protagonists are younger with higher stakes.
Right.
Yeah, when it comes down to it. All right. Well, let's get into some of the characters here. Who would you say was your favorite character from this series?
Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm gonna have to go with Neil, quite honestly. And I know that he seems to be like everybody's favorite character. So I was thinking to myself, "Yeah, do I really want to go with the obvious one?" But honestly, yeah, Neil is the type of character that, as we saw his journey going from super sheltered, idealistic, and very afraid of a lot of different things, and not wanting to step outside of his comfort zone, and fearing danger, to somebody that really grew but yet didn't give up his ideals. Like, he was still true to his core values of what he felt that it meant to be a good person, but he built on that so much. And he was just so likable.
Yeah.
And, it's just his little bubble baths and just everything. He was so loyal and so loving and compassionate that, it's almost like he's the kind of person that you want to aspire to be. So I definitely would put Neil at the top, and then SM33, come on. I love me the
Yeah.
droids. So, I would have to put him right up there too, as far as the non humanoid species type of a character. But
Yeah.
what would you
He's more of
say?
a sidekick character, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, it's really not a fair question because all four of the kids were outstanding in
Oh
this
yes,
movie. I
for
didn't think any of
sure.
them did a bad job here. One of the things I loved about Wim was that you're just talking about Neil being true to himself, but Wim was like really unapologetically himself through all of this.
Hmm.
He wanted to do something other than the standard jobs that everyone was doing that they got assigned through the assessment.
Hmm.
Neil was saying, "Hey, you pretty much told everyone you wanted to be a Jedi," and he's like, "Well, no, I didn't." He's like, "No, you pretty much did. You said you want, help people." And so he was kind of denying that, but at the same point, he didn't deny that he wanted to be able to do something to help people, and that
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
was after adventure, and that's what he kept telling people. It's like, "Hey, this is a chance for a real adventure," and they got to Ad Akron, and Fern is kind of having the crisis of leadership that she is in that instance. He's like, "No, you're doing amazing. I could never have gotten this far on this adventure and stuff like that." But we see him when he's got a moment, he's got a stick and pretending it's a lightsaber and the
Hmm.
like. But you know, I just kind of admire people that are comfortable in their own skin. And even though he got upset from time to time, he missed his mom, he missed his dad, stuff like that. He was someone, he knew who he was, and he was pretty much comfortable, which I think is pretty admirable.
Hmm.
Whereas, you look at KB, another fantastic character, but that was kind of her weakness. And Wim helped her get out of that. She was uncomfortable having to address her disability, with the augment that
Right.
came, that she had to rely on there. And she was afraid if she didn't, attempt to do everything that Fern was going to do, that she was going to lose her only friend. And there she would be, zero friends again. Was the name of that episode there before one was like, well, that's just dumb. You can be friends with Neil and me. And, so
Yeah, I love that.
it's, yeah, but, and then Fern is just, the rebellious type, and she's smart and she's imaginative and she's quick-witted. She figured out how to get SM-33 to tell them what was going on with At-Atten, and what happened with Captain Takranad and the like that. So all those characters, it was such a good core group, and they all had their moments to shine. And I think that was a real strength of the show.
It's true, and, and it definitely did highlight different personalities, and being able to empathize with each one of those personalities, and just their whole dynamic with each other was just so much fun to watch as well.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. So did you have a favorite reference or Easter egg from the series?
Oh my gosh, so many. I'm gonna have to start with the trash crab, just because I just thought that that was so ingenious, the way that they utilized all of those little teeny tiny figurines and model pieces in this thing, everything from protocol droids to astromechs, and you had pieces and parts of mouse droids. And I mean, there were so many little references to different pieces of equipment in Star Wars that you could sit there and look at this thing forever. And just the whole, I think it was called tetanus, right? But the whole idea of just putting all these things together, and then the little baby trash crabs, walking around, I don't know, I just thought that was just absolutely ingenious. But,
Mhm.
some of the other things that I thought were just so cool was, I mean, come on, reference anything that references the, holiday special. So that hologram that
Yeah.
Neil's siblings were watching as they, the little jugglers and the hologram and kind of a thing. I mean, it's basically if you it's like you have to punch your fan card and watch the holiday specials. Painful as it might be, but I just thought that that was super cool too. And there was a lot of other things too. I was trying to jog my memory and going back to what kinds of different Easter eggs and things that there were. And there were some that I didn't even realize were in there. And I don't know if you realize this either, but there's a Mick Giacchino used a musical cue twice that you can hear in Return of the Jedi when Leia blasts two stormtroopers during the Battle of Endor. It's the same um when Wim activates the buried thing on what was it when they were in that not cell, when they were trapped. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool that that was such a throwback to something like that." And
Yeah.
then I also found out that the symbols that they have on their school uniforms, they were an ancient language called Tianese that apparently was also in the Jedi texts. And
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, "Oh, that's really cool." So there was a lot of things like that that were just fun little Easter eggs too. But of course, we talked about all of the things like with ET, and I could go on and on and on, but I'll let you pick out a few and then maybe we can bounce back and forth.
Yeah. Your top 5, that was cool. Um,
Sorry, I just took over.
yeah, that's alright, that's alright. You know, I know you haven't seen it yet, but, the Teak ferryman that was, so that Teak was that was in the, one of the, Ewok movies that came out in the '80s. It was cool. Yeah, I'd heard that there was gonna be one of those somewhere in this series, and I was a little nervous that it was gonna have, like, an oversized role, but then it got to play that little ferryman creature, which I thought was perfect for it, and they didn't overdo it with that character, so I like that a lot. Also, and these are, like, all from the 2nd episode, but, when they're at Port Borgo, but that little critter that was from Captain EO, that Michael Jackson 3D special there, that little
Mhm,
pink flying thing that was in the cage that KB wandered up to, was a neat little find, including a Thelan there in Port Borgo. Again, another reference. There's not a whole lot of Thelans that are on screen in Star Wars, so getting one there was pretty cool. But yeah, just they did a good job of making this very much Star Wars by incorporating a lot of these different type of references in a show that was very different from a lot of anything that we'd seen in Star Wars here. So those were
mhm.
a few of my favorite
Yeah, and it wasn't
moments.
over the top either, it wasn't
Yeah.
that like, "Oh, here's like wink wink, here's an Easter egg, like here's something that you should remember," kind of a thing. It
Right.
was so well embedded and it was just so well in universe that you didn't even like I said, a lot of the stuff was just you just see it for a second, and unless you really have a good eye, you don't really catch it, or
Hmm.
you have to be like, "Where have I seen that before?" kind of a thing, Just like the thing that Wim had where he was looking at his stories, and it was talking about that Jedi temple that was in the ground, and then we
Right.
were talking about, like, oh, yeah, like, the going back to Lothal, and this is where Ezra and Kanan, encountered that Jedi temple that was, they raised up from the ground, so, I just thought that that was really cool too.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I'm not even saying this is so much a reference or an Easter egg, but that when it came to the aliens they decided to feature, they relied heavily on the prequel trilogy and original trilogy aliens. There were some from the sequel trilogy, that one that was singing in Canto Bight, that was showed up on
Mhm.
the platform at La Puna. And then like the critter that was a server at Canto Bight that got
Mhm.
eaten by the hut.
Got
But
yes.
right. But how many Ithorians were there? And then we had a number of other, a lot of aliens that we just got to see that we grew up with. That, as opposed to leaning into like Neil Scanlon just like keeps designing brand new aliens for every single Star Wars project, as opposed to relying on a lot of the ones that we've seen before to create that continuity across the galaxy. But we had the Shistevan, we had Quarren,
Yeah. Mhm.
we had all of these, the Ishitib that was missing an eye stalk, or got
Right.
blasted the star right there at the beginning of it. We got a lot of classic aliens there. It was like they all got transplanted out of Jabba's palace, and
Mhm.
I
Or the
really,
cantina. Mhm.
yeah, I really, really dug that. Just we got the Nikto Vane was back from the Mandalorian, and anyways, I prefer those aliens, and it did help ground this series in the familiar, which I think was one of its real strengths.
I agree, and again, it just felt like home in a lot of ways, and just going back to, the original Star Wars feels, which is what, it's all about, honestly. And not to say that having new creatures and new Star Wars stories and new kinds of elements and things like that is necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, there's definitely something to be said about that comfort zone and, that the feeling of nostalgia. And also because for us, that was our Star Wars, our original Star Wars. And it's so cool that it's being brought back for the new generation, and that
Mhm.
just is, like, twofold very cool.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite pirate? Not including Jod?
Probably Brutus, honestly, I just thought he was so cool. His look was super cool, and I love the fact that they used the Shistavan character again, and
Uh-huh.
even though he was, obviously, in the end, not exactly what everybody had thought he was going to be as far as a leader, I just thought he was a super cool character. But what about you?
No, I think that's a good choice. And if it wasn't him, I liked Gunter. I mean, not necessarily the biggest like Jaleel White fan or something like that, but he's famous for playing Urkel, but yet he
Yeah.
really successfully pulled off this pirate here.
Mhm.
So, some props to him for demonstrating some range when it comes down to that role. But yeah, the Shistevans were so underutilized after that one showed up in the cantina back in A New Hope. And to get one in live action that just wasn't sitting there was really pretty cool. It was something of a sharpshooter, wandered into the ship at the beginning and blasted a bunch of people. And he's the one that shot SM-33 in the second episode when they were trying to
Mhm.
escape from Port Burga, or episode 3, I should say. So it's that was a neat addition there and a great way to use a character that we've seen before. Not everyone's going to recognize that. You'd have to be something more than a casual Star Wars fan to recognize the Shistevan from the Cantina there. So that was definitely a good choice. But then we also got a number of the new characters, and I thought Kim was such a brilliant addition to this show. The
Oh,
little
yeah.
part cat, part owl creature that flew around and had something of a I don't want to say Yoda because it was not a force sensitive character, but like Yoda, like Maz Kanata, was this diminutive sage advisor when it came
Mhm.
down to it. And I hope that's not the last we've seen of her.
I agree. Yeah, I think it would be such a shame if she wasn't utilized again. And I
Mhm.
could see something even, showing up in The Mandalorian. If we get another season of that or even in the movie,
Yeah,
possibly in Ahsoka series, you never know.
yeah, yeah. Well, second season of Skeleton Crew. You know, let's
Yes.
bring it on.
Because we're gonna have a second season.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I was going to ask you if you had a favorite episode from the season. But then I realized that's not even a question I can answer, when it came down to it. I mean, I think the episode where they went to at Akron,
Mhm.
that's the only one I could say is not my favorite for certain.
Mhm.
Um, but the rest of them were just, all on the same par. That I don't know that I could pick one. But how about you?
Yeah, they all flow together so well. And, again, just thinking about it in hindsight, that it's almost hard to, unless I had the episode list right in front of me, to really be able to say, okay, this is where this episode ended and this episode started. And yeah, there's definitely some elements that lend itself to say, oh yeah, this was in this episode kind of a thing. But it really does play like one continuous adventure. And so it's really difficult to pick something about, each one of them that I will say though, I do like the Zero Friends Again one, where they did end up going to, all of the mountain and the whole trash crab thing, and then trying to help KB and saving her and being resourceful in that way. And then the whole Onyx Cinder being, shown as it's shedding its skin, so to speak. That was really, I think, probably, if I had to pick one, probably the standout adventure episode for me, for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, it was such a great episode. It's a worthy choice.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Bryce
It just
Dallas Howard, I mean, come on,
yeah. Yeah, she's good. She's good. One of the things that was fun about this is that, these kids, they recognize that they're kids and they don't have all the answers. But, how many episodes either ended or started with them screaming? They ended the very first episode, the Onyx Cinder's going to hyperspace. They've never been in space, let alone have gone to hyperspace, and they start screaming. That episode you're talking about, they just gotten away from Jod after, he was threatening them there in Takranod's lair, and they're going down the slide screaming. It's just
Right,
that happens a number of times that, and so it's just it's fun getting to see the, kids be kids, even if they were a very talented quartet of kids. They were very, very much kids that way. Uh,
indeed.
yeah, we had a number of, some things that were unresolved, or, things that could have been expanded upon more that I wanted to touch on. But first off, the supervisor. We talked a bit about this in the last episode because that's where we finally got the reveal of the supervisor. And we've been talking about how he is kind of the, the Wizard of Oz reveal, the man behind the curtain that's running everything like that. The fact that he was this big, giant droid dome head type thing sitting on top of the tower. Were you satisfied with that, or would you prefer something else, or what'd you think?
Well, like I said when we talked about that episode, it does make total sense that that would be the case, just because the
Mhm.
fact that, Adatin and these other jewel planets have been hidden for so long. And so you needed something, some entity that could be consistent across those ages to be able to, keep the peace, so to speak, and not have to worry about transferring power or transferring knowledge and that kind of thing. So I was totally okay with it. But how did you feel?
I would just like to have seen more of him
Mhm.
because, they did build up the mystery of the supervisor over the course of this run. And, it wasn't such a big issue in the first episode. Just, Farah shows up at school and you talk to the kids about the importance of their assessment test they're getting ready to take. And, she just kind of admits that, she works underneath the supervisor. So there's a reference there. But as things go by, and when we get those flashbacks to not flashbacks, but those scenes on AT-AT and with the parents and stuff like that, there's more and more references to the supervisor. Has the supervisor contacted the Republic? Or, the droids show up and the supervisor conveys this, or the supervisor can't contact the Republic because they're outside the barrier and that'd be dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And so we knew that there was this entity called the supervisor and it was control. And when we finally get the reveal at the, in the final episode, he's just not in it that much.
Mhm.
And I guess he didn't necessarily have to, because the show wasn't about the supervisor, but for all the buildup, I was just maybe expecting a bit more when it came down to it.
Mhm.
So
That's
I
fair.
guess that's my thought on that. And then, okay, Tack Renard. So, he's the pirate that got the Onyx Center at Atten in the first place. He got killed by his crew and then the ship crashed. And, that's what they discover. But I still feel like, even though we got his story that he stole an AT-AT ship so that he was able to get back to AT-AT, and then he got betrayed by his crew, like I just said, But when we were in his lair, what was it, Skull Ridge Mountain on
Mhm.
Lapuna, when Jod wanted to see him, all we got was a blurry holo image. We never got to see his face. And so either that was a big intentional red herring, because I was theorizing that possibly he had taken over as a supervisor on that. It
Right.
turned out not to be the case. But do you think there was more of a purpose to it than that, or what was the reasoning behind that? Why couldn't they show us him and just give us you could come up with a technical, some sort of in-universe explanation, like the image degraded over time or something like that. And that's fine. But from a storytelling perspective, why didn't they just go ahead and show us what he looked like?
No, I think honestly, it's what you said as far as like just being this ultimate red herring because, at the end it was like, ah, ha, 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 you got us, Star Wars, I mean, and so it was kind of leading us to believing that maybe he could be the supervisor, as you'd pointed out. But I think for all intents and purposes, it was actually a good storytelling vehicle because it kept us guessing, and
Yeah.
if for no other reason than that's what the purpose was of that character, bravo. They nailed it kind of a thing. So I'm not mad about the fact that we didn't get more visualization or we didn't get, more to it than that. But yeah, I think that it was actually pretty ingenious the way that they used that because it was totally not predictable one bit.
I guess I'm just not as enthusiastic about that explanation when it came down to it, because they could have still achieved the same effect by showing us what he looked like and then just not having him show up in the final
Mhm,
episode.
mhm.
And so, perhaps they're holding him back for a potential second season of the show that will finally,
Perhaps, yeah.
or maybe there's another Star Wars story to tell at some point that is the full story of what happened to Tack or not. One of the things that occurred to me, this is kind of an aside here, which is funny, is that when SM33 is telling the kids of the story of what happened to Tack Renaud, and he goes on to say that Renaud's concubine betrayed him and stabbed him.
Right? What's a
Okay.
concubine?
Well, there's that. But remember what Fern, and I realized this when I was rewatching it on the Hidden Heroes channel on Disney Plus. What does Fern say to SM33 to convince him that she's the captain? She spilled his guts. She stabbed him and spilled his guts.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that's what the concubine did. She stabbed him and killed him. And so that is in line with what actually happened to Renaud, whether Fern realized it or not.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, you know, was SM33 like legitimately confused because he had part of his memory, I don't want to say erased, but suppressed with all of that? Or
Oh my gosh, yeah.
did he just generally like Fern and needed a captain?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One that I obviously don't have the answer to. I mean, SM33, there were so many different, things going on within his little motherboard that were either fried or, kind of reprogrammed or whatever that, sometimes I don't know if he knew his up from his down, you know?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Hard to say,
Yeah.
but I will say there was the one hologram that they saw of Tacronauts, there was, like, that symbol, and it almost reminded me of, like, ZZ Top is the best
Oh
way that
yeah.
I can explain it. But, yeah, but, like, I wanna know where we can find that symbol again because I mean, aren't you dying to know where that's gotta be somewhere else. Could we see some pirate show up with that as a tattoo, somewhere?
Oh, sure. Sure.
In as
Yeah.
an Easter egg in something else, like another series or whatever. I just think that would be super cool.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I feel like we haven't seen the last or heard the last of Tack Renaud. I could see, it's Jod used his name as kind of it's like, by Renaud's beard or something like that, or Renaud's ghost. I can't remember what he
Invoking
used.
invoking him. Yeah.
Yeah, and there before we, really knew that Renaud was behind where everything that was going on in that end. Anyway, so I could see in other contexts that same type of thing being invoked again. And I wouldn't put it past them if Renan doesn't show up in another show, but did show up on a book, some sort of a tie-in novel to all of this.
Yeah.
The story
Yeah.
of Attack Renan, I could totally see that one happening. That seems like a no-brainer for that one, or a comic series through High Republic Adventures or something like that.
Sure.
Uh, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
awesome.
I don't know if you saw this, but there was a couple stories that have come out in various interviews since the Skeleton Crew ended. One, they finally confirmed Neil Species. I'm not sure how you pronounce this, but it's spelled Myykkian. So a Mykian.
Mythian
Um,
or
yeah,
Mythian? Yeah.
yeah, but it's we already knew that he wasn't Ortolan, but now they're making it clear that he's definitely not an Ortolan there. But it's being described as an elephantine type species. That was Chris Ford told that to Collider. And then the other thing is that John Watts was giving an interview, and he was asked about this whole notion of a great work and whether that was tied to the High Republic. And we've been questioning this. It's like, when exactly did At and these other planets, all the other At planets, become hidden? And was this a High Republic thing because, again, the Great Work reference, or was it Old Republic, or what the situation was? And he
Mhm.
conceded that it could be tied to Lena So's great works, but they really hadn't set a definitive answer to that. So,
Hmm.
at least, anyways, it's a possibility. We just don't know for certain one way or the other.
Yeah, maybe at some point we'll get to tug on that thread just a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess the last thing to discuss is Jod here. We've experienced a lot of highs and lows with this character, but what's your final impression of him?
All over the place, I mean, we got a little bit of a glimpse to see into his past, and that, some of the reasons why he may have made some of the decisions that he did. But, he's kind of a slimo when it comes to, the way his motivations and things, and how he would go about it, because I mean, obviously he befriended these kids for his own very selfish motives, but then there was also that part of him that you almost felt like he was being compassionate at times, or at least, if nothing else, trying to connect with the kids on, a level that was a little bit compassionate, but then that
Mhm.
rug would just get ripped right out from underneath us. So I feel like Jod is going to be one of those very complicated kind of characters, or he is very complicated kind of character that, again, if we get another season of Skeleton Crew, that it'll be fun to, to pick that apart. But at this point, he's kind of a mystery, but he's a great character though. Very, very convoluted, which I love in such a messy, fun way. But what do you think?
Well, again, mixed feelings on him because he is a murderer. I mean, we see at the beginning of
Right.
the episode, he's leading all these pirates and they kill a whole bunch of people, and he's responsible for that. And then two, very greedy when it comes down to it. All of this was about getting that big score. One of his first speech in the show was, when they get into the vault, was, it all comes down to cold hard credits, and that's one of the last things he talks about in the series as well. So there's some great
Mhm.
symmetry there between the first and the last episode. This desire for credits, and he does pull a dagger and a lightsaber on the kids and threatens their families. However, he never gets a redemption, and that's fine. We don't need to have that theme in every single Star Wars story when it comes down to it. But when KB crashes in the Onyx Cinder, what does he do? He goes like, "It didn't have to be like this."
Yeah, he was very upset.
He was upset about that. He did
Mhm.
not relish that that had happened to her. He didn't want the kids thwarting his plans, but he was not looking to silence them by any means necessary. And I kind of get the feeling that, when he's got them cornered with the lightsaber back on the Onyx Cinder as they're going to at, and he is talking about his past. It's like, oh, you poor child, you poor boy, you were scared, hungry. And then he goes into how, he was poor and had nothing. And then he was found by a Jedi and trained just enough before they, in quotes, found her and killed her in front of him, and then he was kind of forced to fend for himself again. So he has a tragic backstory,
Right.
but it doesn't excuse everything he did. But
No.
I don't know that if I'm going to put him on the galactic scale of evil beings, I don't know that he's going to necessarily be like right next to Emperor Palpatine or anything.
No,
Uh,
definitely not. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that. And thinking back to the Ad Akron episode, he did go out of his way to buy back the Yopis, which was useful in getting the kids out from underneath. Which one of the tribes was? I forget their names, but they were kind of being forced to
Like
lead.
Lupin or whatever.
Yeah, the Troik and the something or other, I
Mhm.
can't remember. But uh, so they were being forced to lead the mission against the other tribe. And then when SM-33 looks like he's about to pulverize Neil, he jumps in and deactivates him as well. Perhaps that was out of necessity because he wanted to get at and he's not going to be able to do it if the kids all get clobbered and the like. But
Right.
at the same time, you know, he did. Uh, I don't want to say something as trite as that he wasn't all bad, but he did show, like you said, some distress over things that were happening, especially around the kids.
Mhm. Mhm. And just the fact that, we are so perplexed by him, I think shows a great character. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, that just shows a very well written, well conceived character.
yeah. All right. Well, we've gone a little longer than usual, but you got anything else you want to talk about with the show before we wrap it up?
Again, it's just I've been telling everybody it was the Star Wars I never thought I always needed, kind of a thing. And it's such a breath of fresh air, and I'm so excited to rewatch it again, and as we said, just come on, bring on season 2, and because there's still some things to resolve, and I
Sure.
think that the fan base and general consensus is that bring it on.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens to AT-AT now that it's no longer a hidden planet. This of eternal treasure. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, they can't release all those credits into the galaxy, all 1,139 volts full of them, because that
Mhm.
would just crash the economy. But there's plenty of stories to be told for Wim is got all the opportunities in the world now. He didn't want to do a remedial job there on that, and well, now he can go out into the galaxy and do something. So all
Right.
kinds of possibilities going forward for that. So
Very
bring
cool.
it on. Sign us up.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then that will do it for this look back at Skeleton Crew. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of Podcast Stardust. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And if so, hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher if you haven't done so already, and you'll get all of our future episodes. We're currently diving back into the Clone Wars. We cover the news every week, and then we have some other discussion and a couple other great series going. But make sure you join us for those. Once you've done that and you want to look into some more of our back content, a great place to do that is over at retrozap.com, where our entire catalog of all previous 840 shows can be found, as well as some other great podcasts covering a lot of other things in geek and retro culture. Jay, this is the time of the show where I ask you to remind everybody what our social media contacts are one more time and where else we can be found around the internet.
All right. Always a delightful thing to do. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust. And we do have our Pinterest boards with tons of different Star Wars ideas that you can check out. And we also have our YouTube outlet. So you can check us out on the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And again, you can always find us on Spotify and Audible and lots of other streaming outlets as well. And you can help support the show by heading over to T Public. And we have a link in our show notes that you can just go ahead and hit, and it'll take you hyperspace right to where you need to go. And we have t shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, home goods, all kinds of fun stuff. And once again, every one of those purchases does help to support the show, and we would really appreciate it. So thanks in advance.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and take this opportunity to remind everybody what's going on in the world of cosplay?
All right. So you can always catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I am having a lot of fun so far since the very beginning of the year. There's been a lot of really cool things that have happened. I was sharing that I have a feature in Creative Cosplays magazine, mid-season issue number 20, team ups with Commander Oppo on Instagram and Dr. Cap Photography. So we were very fortunate to be chosen for that particular episode. So you can check that out through my Instagram and in my bio. If you want to snag a physical copy or a digital copy of that magazine, you can do so. And definitely looking forward to the spring. I'm going to be debuting a couple of new cosplays, not Star Wars though this time. So they're a little bit more I guess you'd call them closet cosplays for the most part, but very easy to do. And one involves a lot of makeup. I just did a makeup test recently, so you have to be on the lookout for that one.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Friday, we are continuing the aforementioned Clone Wars series. And then on Monday, we are getting back into some Star Wars news. So with that, thanks for listening to episode 841 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be